Welcome to today's show, Legacy Living, Make Your Life Count. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Burgess, passionate, inspirational speaker, author, poet, and entrepreneur. Good morning, and welcome to Legacy Living, Make Your Life Count. Today is Wednesday, June 6th. I want to give a big thank you to those of you listening today all around the world. I'm delighted and so grateful that you tuned in. I sure hope you're enjoying a fabulous day today and that you're having a fantastic week. And I hope you're making a difference in your own life, because when you do, you also make a difference in someone else's life. Now, a lot of folks really want to make their life count for something, but they don't seem to know how, or it seems so big, so overwhelming to them, they don't know how or where to begin. So they ask me, how do you do that? Dr. Gloria, how do you make your life count? Well, it's really very simple. Very simple. You make your life count by being there for someone who needs the sweet fragrance of your presence. You make your life count by your kind spirit, the wonderful small things that you do for someone. You make your life count by being an uplifter, by being an encourager, by taking a walk with someone you love, by baking and sharing a batch of cookies, or buying a little extra food the next time you're at the market and donating it to a family in need. You make your life count by being grateful for who you are, being grateful for whose you are, and by making sure that you live your purpose by giving your gifts to the world. It's all part of legacy living. It's all part of how you make your life count. So you make your life count day by day, step by step, moment by moment, smile by smile, every single day, 365, 24/7. That's what Legacy Living, Make Your Life Count is all about. You can learn more about Legacy Living, Make Your Life Count by visiting the Gloria Burgess website. That's GLORIA, B as in boy, URGESS.com. That's the Gloria Burgess website, gloriaburgess.com, or by visiting Facebook. And that's facebook.com/DR for Dr. DR, GLORIA, BURGESS, PHD /. Now, if you're just joining us, I'm your host, Dr. Gloria. This is Legacy Living, Make Your Life Count. I'm excited to have you listening today, and I'm deeply honored that you've allowed me to be part of your life for this next hour or so you can be inspired by the ideas and resources to make your life count. Let me tell you something. You are in for a real treat. Today's program is called Pass It On. Now, that sounds like what I've already been talking about, doesn't it? Well, Pass It On is also the name of a book, a children's picture book that I've written, and I want to share the story and the background information about the book because it's perfectly relevant to making your life count. But first, let me introduce a person who will be joining me on today's show. He's my husband, friend, business partner, life partner, and soulmate, John Burgess. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Gloria, and thank you for asking me to join you today. It's a real treat.
Now, if you've been a regular listener to the show, Legacy Living, Make Your Life Count, you know that I've interviewed some fabulous guests on previous shows. Well, today, I've asked John to interview me about Pass It On. I think this will be a lot of fun.
I know it will. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Well, let's get started.
Okay. Why don't you start, Gloria, by giving your listeners a summary of what Pass It On is all about?
I would love to do that. And let me just say before I start on that summary that, one of the reasons we're doing this show right now is because the book just came out. I mean, it's literally hot off the press,
yes.
and just really excited to share about it today. So Pass It On is a book about my father, Ernest McEwen Jr., and it's also about his benefactor, William Faulkner. Now, let me just stop right there for just a minute. When I talk about Pass It On, especially to younger people, many of them don't know who William Faulkner is. They kind of know he's an important person, but they really don't know who he is. So for those of you who may not know, William Faulkner is a novelist and short story writer from the American South, a Pulitzer Prize-winning Nobel laureate author. So my father, Ernest McEwen Jr., had a life-changing relationship with this author, William Faulkner. When my father was a little boy, people called him Ernie, not Ernest, right? So they called him Ernie, or sometimes they called him Mac, which was his nickname.
I knew your father, and I always heard people call him either Ernie or Mac.
Yeah, that's right. So my dad had two dreams when he was a little boy. He wanted to live in a house with running water, and more than anything, he also wanted to go to college. Now, as a young man, my father worked as a janitor at the University of Mississippi. We call it Ole Miss as a nickname, okay? He could work there, but he couldn't go to school there because it was still segregated. But that was where he met one of the deans of the university. And that person put my father in touch with William Faulkner. And that one person, that one contact that he made would change his life, my father's life, and our family's life for all time. So that's what the book is about. It's about this young boy named Ernie who loved to read books, who loved going to school, who loved learning more than anything else. And at this very special time in history, he met William Faulkner, who became his benefactor. Now, by the time they met, Faulkner had already heard from the dean about my dad's dream of going to college. And Faulkner could see how dedicated and determined my father was about getting a good college education. And so he asked my dad about his dream, and my father told him the story from his heart as well, right? So Faulkner paid for my father to go to college with no strings attached. That's what Pass It On is all about. No strings attached. He just said, Mr. McEwen, I want you to pass this gift on to other people when you're able to do that. And that's exactly what my dad did throughout his life. And that's why the title of the book is called Pass It On.
Gloria, can you tell us what initially inspired you to write this book about your father?
People ask me that question a lot. What inspired you to write this story? Well, there are a number of inspirations. This, first and foremost, is a family story. And what I mean by that is that, we would talk about it with our family members, but we wouldn't necessarily talk about it outside the family. I mean, most family stories are called family stories for a reason, right?
Right.
And we all have them. And I remember one day I can't even remember what the real reason was, but I was talking with one of my business clients who happened to mention that he had lived in Mississippi during, one of our conversations. And for some reason, this story about my dad and Faulkner just came tumbling out of my mouth. And my client looked at me and he said, Gloria, have you ever shared this story with anyone before? And I said, well, not anyone outside my family because it's a family story. And he said, oh, my word. Now, I have to tell you, he was speaking as a journalist. His background was in journalism, and he said, you have to write this story down. And I said, why? And he said, you must write about this story. And I said, why? And he said, first of all, it's an important story. And second of all, it's your story. And if you don't write about it, who will? It never occurred to me. Now, that person's name the person I was talking to, is Conrad. And his words really hit me hard. They made an impact on me, and I carried them in my heart for several years. And then I began to write down what I was, just kind of noodling about in my head. And what came out initially was a series of poems about my father, not a children's book.
That's fantastic. And it makes sense because you are a poet and you've written poems for a very long time. Can you tell us about some of the other inspirations that came to you in this process?
Of course. Well, as I just mentioned, my original inspiration was this conversation that I had with my friend Conrad that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. Another key inspiration for the book was to capture my dad's story for all time, to honor him, and to convey his life with as much justice as I could. That was another inspiration, to honor my father and my family in that way. It was important to write down his story and to write it not from somebody else's point of view, like the point of view of a historian perhaps, but from the point of view of his daughter, right, from my perspective, while also honoring his perspective and his life in terms of how he would have shared this story and how he lived it at the same time. Mm-hmm. I remember having a conversation with my mom because my dad had passed away by this time, and I said, "Mom, would you mind if I wrote this story down?" In other words, I was asking for her permission. I wanted her blessing. This, again, was a family story, and I wanted to honor her, too. And this was also a very private, intimate story of my mom's life and my dad's life as young people, right? Yeah. So, of course, the story would be told through my voice because I was writing it, but it was also important for me to get her blessing, her permission. And she said to me, "Gloria, of course you can write this story." She said, "If it blesses just one person, if it helps just one human being, it will be worth the time and effort of you writing this story down." And so I had my mom's blessing. I had the encouragement from my friend Conrad, and, of course, I had the inspiration that comes to writers, right? Some of the time, not all of the time. And most importantly, I was blessed by that divine inspiration, the kind of blessing that only comes from God. It was just so important for me to write this story down and get it told and to get it out into the world for others.
Thank you. Wow. I love that story, that part of the story. I can hear how important it is for you to get the story out. And I know from personal experience with you how important this story was to your dad and for your mom, you and the rest of your family. Now, earlier you mentioned that you had written a series of poems about your dad at first. How did your writing of those poems transform into your writing of a children's book?
That's a great question. Now, so as I began to write more and more about my dad and his life, capturing the essence of him and what he meant to me, dialogue started coming into my consciousness. Mm-hmm. The people of the story that's now the book called Pass It On were coming alive. I mean, they were coming alive through me. During this time, I also kept thinking, children's picture book. And I asked myself, how might I tell this story in words and also in images? Okay, so that was also floating through my consciousness, the images. I wanted to write the narrative well, but I also wanted to let the story just kind of unfold through images and pictures. And so as a writer, I was very conscious of the art and craft of writing, while I was also leaving enough unsaid, untold in the narrative so that the illustrator would have room on stage, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. So why a children's picture book? Well, I can tell you that